You should know your place. People like you don't belong in a room like this. The cruel remark drifted across the glittering ballroom just loudly enough for nearby guests to hear, and within seconds, a few quiet chuckles spread through the crowd. Maya Brooks kept her eyes on the silver serving tray balanced steadily in her hands as if the words had been carried away by the soft music instead of aimed directly at her. She had worked enough formal events across Chicago to recognize the difference between accidental rudeness and deliberate humiliation, and tonight was unquestionably the second. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across polished marble floors while nearly 300 distinguished guests mingled beneath towering floral arrangements and gold-trimmed ceilings. CEOs, politicians, philanthropists, and influential business families filled every corner of the Romano Estate's grand ballroom, each dressed in tailored tuxedos or elegant evening gowns that reflected the wealth gathered under one roof. Among them, Maya's black and white maid uniform made her nearly invisible until someone decided to remind everyone she was there. She quietly refilled champagne glasses, collected empty plates, and thanked every guest with the same calm professionalism, refusing to let embarrassment change the rhythm of her work. A woman wearing a sparkling designer dress glanced toward Maya with a smug smile before whispering to the man beside her, "I can't believe they trust the help this close to the chairman's table." The man laughed under his breath. "She's lucky they let her inside instead of keeping her in the kitchen." Several nearby guests smiled politely, pretending they hadn't heard while making no effort to stop the conversation. Maya simply continued walking. She had learned years ago that dignity was often measured by what a person refused to become. Across the ballroom, Ethan Walker stood near the grand staircase, greeting arriving investors with the quiet confidence that had earned him respect long before anyone learned the extent of his family's influence. Tall, composed, and dressed in an impeccably tailored black suit, he noticed the uncomfortable exchange from across the room. His expression tightened for only a brief moment before returning to its usual calm. Tonight was too important for unnecessary confrontation. Every guest inside the mansion had come for one reason. They were waiting for the arrival of the man almost no one had seen in public for years. Ethan's father. The legendary Korean businessman whose reputation inspired admiration from some and nervous silence from everyone else. Even experienced executives checked their watches more often than usual. Staff members adjusted centerpieces that already looked perfect. Security personnel quietly communicated through discreet earpieces while luxury vehicles continued pulling through the circular driveway outside. The atmosphere grew heavier with every passing minute. Conversations became shorter. Laughter faded. Even the string quartet softened its performance as anticipation settled over the room like an approaching storm. Maya carried another tray toward the entrance, unaware that several of the same guests who had mocked her only moments earlier were still watching with amused expressions, convinced they already understood exactly who she was. None of them noticed the way her eyes briefly lifted toward the massive front doors as though something deep inside her had suddenly awakened. And none of them could have imagined that before this extraordinary evening came to an end, the woman they dismissed as nothing more than a black maid would become the only person in the entire ballroom capable of bringing one of the world's most powerful men to a complete stop. Maya lowered her gaze again and continued across the ballroom with the same steady pace she had practiced through years of service. Every polished glass remained perfectly balanced on her silver tray despite the quiet laughter that still lingered behind her. She had discovered long ago that responding to every careless remark only gave it more power, while silence often preserved something far more valuable than pride. As another guest accepted a sparkling glass without bothering to thank her, Maya simply offered the same respectful smile she gave everyone else. A younger server quietly stepped beside her and whispered, "Are you all right?" Maya answered with a gentle nod. "I am fine. We still have a job to do." The young woman looked unconvinced but returned to her station without another word. Nearby, several influential guests gathered around one of the marble columns, speaking in voices they assumed could not be overheard. "I heard Ethan hired her because she works hard," one man said with a dismissive shrug. Another smiled into his drink. "Hard work is one thing. Belonging here is another." A woman wearing an elegant emerald gown adjusted the diamond bracelet on her wrist before adding, "Events like this are about image. Every detail matters." Maya heard every sentence as she carefully replaced an empty water pitcher with a fresh one. Not once did she allow frustration to appear on her face. She reminded herself that character was revealed most clearly when nobody expected kindness in return. Across the ballroom, Ethan Walker continued greeting distinguished guests, yet his attention drifted toward Maya more often than he realized. During the past 3 years she had never arrived late, never complained, and never failed to help another employee before finishing her own responsibilities. She carried herself with a quiet confidence that seemed unusual for someone whose position attracted so little respect. Ethan had noticed it many times, although he had never asked about her life before she joined the household staff. Tonight, however, something felt different. There was an unusual calm in Maya that seemed untouched by the judgment surrounding her. Outside, the final rays of sunset faded beyond the towering gates of the Romano estate as one luxury vehicle after another rolled through the illuminated driveway. Members of the security team adjusted their positions with quiet precision while earpieces carried brief updates confirming arrival times. Inside, conversations slowly became shorter. Even guests who had spent the evening boasting about business deals now checked the entrance every few moments. Nobody wanted to miss the arrival everyone had anticipated for weeks. The legendary Korean patriarch rarely appeared at public gatherings anymore, and countless stories surrounded his reputation for discipline, loyalty, and quiet authority. Some guests had rehearsed their greetings repeatedly before leaving home, hoping to make a favorable impression if given the opportunity. Maya carried a fresh tray toward the entrance hall just as the musicians eased into a slower melody. A subtle change spread through the mansion. Staff members instinctively straightened their posture. Security personnel became noticeably more alert. The conversations that had filled the ballroom only moments earlier dissolved into a respectful hush without anyone requesting silence. Maya paused beside an arrangement of white orchids near the grand entrance, her eyes lifting almost unconsciously toward the towering carved doors. She could not explain why her heartbeat suddenly felt different or why an unfamiliar sense of recognition quietly settled over her. Around her, hundreds of guests focused entirely on the entrance, convinced they were about to witness the arrival of the most respected man in the room. None of them paid attention to the young black maid standing only a few feet away, unaware that within the next few moments she would notice something before anyone else did, and that single moment of recognition would quietly begin changing the course of the entire evening. The towering wooden doors at the front of the ballroom slowly began to open, and every quiet conversation disappeared almost instantly. The gentle music faded as the members of the string quartet lowered their instruments, recognizing the moment that everyone had been anticipating throughout the evening. A line of impeccably dressed security personnel stepped aside with practiced precision while several senior members of the Walker organization stood respectfully along the entrance, their expressions composed yet unmistakably attentive. Ethan Walker took a measured breath before walking forward alone, stopping several feet from the entrance with calm confidence. Although he rarely appeared nervous in front of anyone, tonight carried a different weight. He had not hosted his father at an American family gathering in several years, and everyone present understood that this visit was more significant than an ordinary celebration. Business leaders quietly adjusted their jackets. Distinguished guests straightened their posture. Even those who had spent the previous hour speaking loudly about their own accomplishments suddenly became remarkably humble. Outside, the soft glow of luxury vehicles reflected across the polished stone entrance as one final black sedan came to a smooth stop beneath the grand portico. The chauffeur stepped forward and opened the rear passenger door with deliberate care. An elderly Korean gentleman emerged with unhurried confidence, wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that reflected decades of quiet discipline rather than extravagant wealth. His silver hair was neatly combed, his posture remained perfectly straight, and his calm eyes carried the unmistakable presence of someone who had never needed to raise his voice to command respect. Chairman Daniel Kang walked forward without hesitation, acknowledging no one at first as he crossed the entrance with measured steps. Ethan bowed respectfully before greeting his father in Korean, his voice warm yet formal. Chairman Kang returned the greeting with a gentle nod before continuing toward the ballroom. One after another, respected guests lowered their heads as he passed. Some offered carefully practiced Korean greetings while others simply bowed in respectful silence, hoping not to make a mistake during such an important introduction. Chairman Kang acknowledged each gesture with quiet courtesy but never paused for conversation. His attention seemed fixed on reaching the center of the ballroom. Maya Brooks remained beside the arrangement of white orchids holding a polished silver tray with fresh crystal glasses, her breathing calm despite the growing tension surrounding her. As Chairman Kang stepped beneath the golden light of the chandeliers, something unexpectedly stirred within her. His face seemed strangely familiar, not because she had seen photographs or newspaper articles, but because a distant memory she could not fully explain quietly surfaced from somewhere deep inside her heart. Without understanding why, Maya felt an overwhelming certainty that standing silently would be the wrong thing to do. Around her, every guest remained focused on observing the distinguished visitor, believing the evening would unfold exactly according to tradition. No one paid attention to the young black maid standing quietly near the entrance. Ethan continued walking beside his father while several prominent executives prepared to introduce themselves. Yet just before Chairman Kang reached the center of the ballroom, Maya gently placed her serving tray onto the nearby table with careful hands. Her expression remained peaceful, her posture naturally respectful, and for the first time that evening she took one small step forward, unaware that within the next heartbeat every person inside the magnificent ballroom would stop watching the chairman and begin watching her instead. Every movement inside the ballroom seemed to slow as Maya Brooks stepped quietly away from the serving table. She did not look toward the guests who had mocked her only minutes earlier, nor did she glance at the curious faces now beginning to notice that she had left her position. Her attention rested entirely on Chairman Daniel Kang. The unfamiliar certainty growing inside her felt impossible to explain. It was not excitement, and it was not fear. It was the quiet conviction that respect should be offered before anything else. Maya stopped several feet in front of a distinguished guest, gently folded her hands in front of her, and lowered her head in a graceful bow that reflected genuine humility rather than rehearsed protocol. Then, in a calm voice that carried effortlessly through the silent ballroom, she greeted him in an authentic Busan dialect. The unfamiliar Korean words floated through the air with remarkable clarity. They were neither loud nor dramatic, yet they possessed a warmth and sincerity that instantly captured the attention of everyone present. The effect was immediate. Conversations that had already faded into whispers disappeared completely. The soft clink of crystal glasses stopped. A waiter carrying a tray froze in the middle of a step. Even the musicians remained perfectly still, their instruments resting silently in their hands. Most of the guests could not understand a single word Maya had spoken, but they immediately sensed that something extraordinary had just happened. Ethan Walker turned sharply toward Maya, surprise flashing across his normally composed face. He had never heard her speak Korean before, much less with the unmistakable rhythm and pronunciation of someone who had grown up hearing that particular regional dialect. Several executives exchanged confused glances. One quietly whispered, "Did she just speak Korean?" Another answered, "Not just Korean." Listen to Chairman Kang. Every eye shifted toward the elderly patriarch. Chairman Kang had stopped walking the instant Maya finished speaking. His calm expression, so steady only moments earlier, slowly changed. His eyes remained fixed on the young black maid standing respectfully before him. There was no anger in his face. There was no confusion either. Instead, something far deeper appeared, something that looked remarkably like recognition mixed with emotion that had been carefully hidden for many years. Ethan noticed the subtle change immediately. Throughout his entire life, he had watched his father negotiate billion-dollar agreements without revealing the slightest hint of emotion. He had seen him remain composed during moments that would have overwhelmed almost anyone else. Yet now, after hearing only a brief greeting from a woman nobody had considered important enough to acknowledge, his father stood completely motionless. Several uncomfortable seconds passed without anyone speaking. The silence itself became almost impossible to ignore. Guests who had laughed at Maya only minutes earlier now stared at her with growing uncertainty. The woman in the emerald gown lowered her eyes, suddenly unable to smile with the same confidence. Even members of the household staff exchanged puzzled looks, silently wondering whether they had somehow missed an important part of Maya's past. Maya herself remained perfectly still, her head respectfully lowered, making no effort to explain what had just happened. She expected nothing in return. She simply believed she had offered the proper greeting to a man who deserved it. But as Chairman Kang slowly drew a measured breath and took one deliberate step toward her, the atmosphere inside the magnificent ballroom shifted once again, and every person watching instinctively realized that whatever happened next would be remembered far longer than the lavish banquet itself. Chairman Daniel Kang continued looking at Maya Brooks as though the crowded ballroom around them had quietly disappeared. His eyes searched her face with gentle disbelief, lingering not on her uniform or the silver tray resting behind her, but on the calm expression she had never allowed the evening's insults to disturb. Another long moment passed before he slowly closed the remaining distance between them. Hundreds of guests watched without daring to whisper. Ethan Walker instinctively took a small step forward, uncertain whether he should intervene or simply observe. He had expected his father to acknowledge the respectful greeting with a polite nod before continuing toward the head table. Instead, Chairman Kang stopped directly in front of Maya. His shoulders relaxed almost imperceptibly as a faint smile softened the disciplined expression that had intimidated powerful people for decades. Then, with measured grace that reflected generations of tradition, he lowered his head into a deep, respectful bow toward the young black maid. The reaction inside the ballroom was immediate. A quiet gasp spread through the guests like a ripple across still water. Several crystal glasses nearly slipped from trembling hands. One executive blinked repeatedly as though convinced he had misunderstood what he had just witnessed. The woman in the emerald gown instinctively covered her mouth. The businessman who had mocked Maya only minutes earlier stared in complete disbelief, his confident smile disappearing without a trace. Ethan remained perfectly still. During his entire life he had rarely seen his father bow so deeply to anyone outside their own family elders or the few mentors he regarded with lifelong gratitude. Yet tonight, in front of distinguished leaders from across the country, Chairman Kang had offered that same profound respect to a woman almost everyone else had overlooked. Maya immediately raised her hand slightly in quiet surprise and respectfully bowed in return, her expression filled with sincere humility rather than triumph. She seemed almost uncomfortable becoming the center of attention. Chairman Kang spoke softly in Korean, his voice warm and unmistakably emotional. Although most of the guests could not understand his words, they immediately recognized the affection and gratitude carried within them. Maya answered with the same calm dialect she had used moments earlier, speaking only a few sentences before lowering her head once again. Their conversation remained brief, gentle, and deeply respectful. No raised voices. No dramatic gestures. Yet every exchange seemed to deepen the mystery surrounding the young maid. Ethan listened carefully, recognizing familiar Korean words but struggling to understand why his father's usually reserved voice sounded almost relieved. It was the tone of someone who had unexpectedly rediscovered something precious after believing it had been lost forever. Around the ballroom, quiet speculation began replacing earlier judgment. Guests who had dismissed Maya as insignificant now searched one another's faces for explanations that nobody possessed. Several household employees exchanged astonished glances, realizing they had worked beside Maya for years without ever imagining she carried a connection capable of stopping Chairman Kang in his tracks. Maya herself never attempted to explain anything. She neither sought recognition nor reacted to the stunned expression surrounding her. She simply maintained the same respectful composure she had displayed since the beginning of the evening. As Chairman Kang slowly straightened from his bow, he looked toward Ethan with thoughtful eyes before turning back to Maya once more, and the quiet smile that appeared on his face suggested that the story connecting them had begun many years before anyone gathered inside the Romano estate had ever heard her name. The silence that followed seemed to stretch far beyond the walls of the ballroom. No one rushed to fill it because no one trusted their own understanding of what they had just witnessed. The atmosphere that had once carried quiet confidence now felt uncertain, as though the evening itself had suddenly begun following rules that only Chairman Daniel Kang understood. One by one, guests slowly lowered the crystal glasses they had unconsciously frozen in midair. The conversations that had once revolved around investments, influence, and social status disappeared completely, replaced by whispered questions that traveled from one corner of the ballroom to another. "Who is she?" one executive quietly asked. "How does Chairman Kang know her?" another replied. "Did Ethan ever mention this?" No one had an answer. The woman in the emerald gown who had dismissed Maya only a short time earlier stared at the young maid with growing embarrassment. She replayed every careless remark she had made, suddenly realizing that every judgment had been spoken within earshot of someone who had apparently earned extraordinary respect from the most influential guest in attendance. The businessman beside her shifted uneasily and straightened his jacket, avoiding eye contact with anyone nearby. His confident smile had vanished, replaced by the uncomfortable expression of someone realizing he had confidently misunderstood an entire situation. Members of the household staff looked toward Maya with completely different eyes. She was still wearing the same neatly pressed black and white uniform. She still stood with quiet humility beside the white orchids. Nothing about her appearance had changed. Yet somehow everything about the way people perceived her had transformed within a matter of seconds. Ethan Walker remained beside his father, carefully studying both Maya and Chairman Kang. Throughout his years leading the family organization, Ethan had learned to read people through subtle details that others overlooked. His father rarely displayed emotion without purpose, and he never extended such visible respect unless it reflected something deeply important. Ethan searched his memory, trying to recall whether he had ever heard Maya mention Korea, Busan, or anything connected to his father's past. Nothing came to mind. That absence of explanation only deepened his curiosity. Chairman Kang noticed the confusion surrounding the room but showed no concern for the shifting opinions of the guests. Instead, he turned once more toward Maya and offered a gentle smile that carried the warmth of an old memory rather than the formality expected at a public reception. Maya respectfully returned the smile with another small bow before quietly stepping backward toward the serving table, intending to continue her responsibilities as though nothing extraordinary had happened. The simple gesture surprised everyone even more. She made no attempt to remain at the center of attention. She did not introduce herself. She did not explain the greeting or the bow. She simply reached for the silver tray she had carefully set aside and prepared to continue serving drinks with the same calm professionalism she had shown all evening. Watching her return to work as though she had not become the most discussed person in the mansion left many guests even more unsettled. The contrast was impossible to ignore. The people who had spent years building reputation seemed eager for recognition, while the one person who had unexpectedly received the greatest honor wanted nothing more than to quietly fulfill her responsibilities. Chairman Kang observed her for another thoughtful moment before slowly turning toward Ethan. There was understanding in his eyes, but there was also a story waiting to be told, and Ethan realized that the answer everyone in the ballroom desperately wanted was connected to a chapter of his father's life that had never been shared with anyone. After several quiet moments, Ethan Walker finally spoke, keeping his voice low enough that only his father could hear. "Father, may I ask how you know Maya?" Chairman Daniel Kang did not answer immediately. Instead, he watched as Maya continued serving guests with the same steady hand she had shown since the beginning of the evening. She greeted every guest politely, accepted empty glasses with a grateful smile, and behaved as though nothing remarkable had happened. That simple humility seemed to strengthen the emotion already visible in the older man's eyes. Finally, Chairman Kang smiled softly. "There are some debts that cannot be measured with money," he said. Ethan frowned slightly. "You have never mentioned her before." "Because I did not know I would ever see her again," Chairman Kang replied. His gaze drifted toward the crystal chandeliers overhead, as though searching through memories that had remained untouched for many years. "Long before you began leading our family business, I traveled frequently throughout South Korea, meeting people from every region. During one difficult winter, I found myself in Busan after an exhausting journey. A severe snowstorm delayed transportation across the city, and nearly every restaurant and hotel had already closed for the night. I remember standing outside in freezing wind, wondering where I could find shelter until morning." Ethan listened without interrupting. He had rarely heard his father speak about his younger years with such openness. Chairman Kang continued, his voice calm and reflective. "An elderly woman noticed that I was alone. She invited me into her modest home without asking who I was or what I could offer in return. She served me a warm meal, prepared a simple place for me to rest, and treated me like family even though we had never met before. Before I left the following morning, I thanked her for her kindness. She smiled and said that true respect should always be offered freely because no one knows when kindness may return in another form. Ethan remained silent as the story unfolded. Chairman Kang looked once more toward Maya, who was helping an elderly couple find their seats near the front of the ballroom. Before I departed, there was a little girl standing beside that woman. She watched everything with bright, curious eyes. When I thanked her grandmother, the little girl repeated the exact same bosom greeting that Maya spoke to me tonight. The pronunciation, the tone, even the small pause before the final words were identical. It was a greeting taught with great care, passed from one generation to another. Ethan slowly turned toward Maya again, trying to picture the quiet young woman as a child growing up thousands of miles away. Chairman Kang drew a slow breath. I cannot yet say with complete certainty what connects those memories. Too many years have passed, and life has taken all of us in unexpected directions. But when I heard that greeting tonight, I did not hear only familiar words. I heard the kindness of a family that once expected nothing from me except that I would remember to treat every person with dignity. Some memories never disappear. They simply wait for the right moment to return. Ethan followed his father's gaze toward Maya once again, realizing that the answer everyone in the ballroom wanted was still incomplete, and that the greatest surprise of the evening had not yet been revealed. The question spreading across the ballroom could no longer remain unanswered. Chairman Daniel Kang slowly stepped toward the center of the room and turned to face the guests who had been watching every movement in complete silence. His calm expression carried neither anger nor disappointment. Instead, it reflected the quiet certainty of someone who had learned that the greatest lessons in life rarely needed to be spoken loudly. He looked toward Maya Brooks before addressing the room in a measured voice. Many of you are wondering why I offered my respect to this remarkable young woman. No one interrupted. Even the soft clinking of silverware had disappeared. The answer is not found in wealth, titles, or influence. It began many years ago with an act of kindness that expected absolutely nothing in return. Ethan Walker stood beside his father, listening just as attentively as every guest in attendance. Chairman Kang continued, after leaving Busan, I searched for that family several times over the years. I learned that the grandmother had passed away and that the family had eventually moved overseas. Every trail ended before I could thank them properly. I accepted that I might never see any of them again. He paused before looking at Maya once more. When Miss Brooks greeted me tonight, I recognized more than her words. I recognized the values that shaped them. Respect offered freely. Humility without expectation. Kindness shown even when no one is watching. Those are gifts that remain with a person for an entire lifetime. Maya lowered her head modestly. Chairman Kang, my grandmother often spoke about a traveler she once welcomed into her home during a difficult winter. She told me that every person deserves dignity before judgment and that the smallest act of kindness can travel farther than we ever imagine. She taught me that greeting when I was a little girl because she believed respect should always come from the heart. Chairman Kang smiled warmly. Then your grandmother and I have finally met again through you. A quiet murmur swept across the ballroom. Guests who had spent the evening measuring one another by reputation suddenly found themselves reflecting on their own behavior. The woman in the emerald gown slowly approached Maya with sincere hesitation. Miss Brooks, she said softly, I owe you an apology. I judged you before I knew anything about you. I am truly sorry. The businessman who had laughed earlier stepped forward as well. So am I. I confused someone's position with their worth, and I was wrong. Maya responded with the same gentle composure she had shown throughout the evening. Thank you. I believe every day gives us another chance to treat people better than we did yesterday. Her words carried no bitterness, only quiet grace. Ethan watched the exchange with growing admiration. Throughout years of leading powerful negotiations, he had witnessed people demand respect through authority, money, or reputation. Maya had done none of those things. She had simply remained true to herself, and respect had found her naturally. Chairman Kang rested a reassuring hand on Ethan's shoulder. Never forget this evening, he said quietly. Buildings grow old. Fortunes rise and fall. Influence changes with time. But character remains the only investment that never loses its value. Looking around the magnificent ballroom, Ethan realized the atmosphere had completely transformed. The guests were no longer staring at Maya because she was different. They were looking at her because she had quietly reminded every person present that genuine honor is never determined by occupation, appearance, or social standing, but by the kindness a person continues to offer when the world gives them every reason not to. As the evening gradually returned to its elegant rhythm, the atmosphere inside the Romano estate no longer resembled the gathering that had begun only a short time earlier. The conversation sounded different now. They were quieter, more thoughtful, and noticeably less concerned with titles, fortunes, or influence. Guests who had spent years introducing themselves through accomplishments found themselves reflecting instead on a simple lesson delivered without accusation or pride. Maya Brooks quietly resumed her responsibilities, carrying fresh glasses to each table with the same steady smile she had worn from the beginning of the evening. She did not seek attention, nor did she behave differently because the room now viewed her with admiration instead of indifference. To Maya, the work itself still deserved the same care it always had. Several guests who had never acknowledged her before now thanked her sincerely as she passed. Others stepped aside to give her room instead of expecting her to move around them. Small gestures replaced grand speeches, and somehow those gestures felt far more meaningful. Ethan Walker watched every interaction with growing respect. Before that evening, he had admired Maya as a dependable employee who consistently carried out her responsibilities with professionalism. Now he realized he had never truly seen the person behind the uniform. As she finished serving one of the final tables, Ethan approached her with a warm expression. "Miss Brooks," he said, "I owe you my own apology. I believed I was paying attention to the people who worked in this house, but tonight I realized I only noticed the work, not the person doing it. Thank you for reminding all of us that dignity cannot be assigned by position." Maya smiled gently. "You do not owe me anything, Mr. Walker. My grandmother always said that every day gives people another opportunity to become a little kinder than they were yesterday. I think tonight gave all of us that opportunity." Ethan nodded thoughtfully, recognizing that the simplest words often carried the greatest wisdom. Nearby, Chairman Daniel Kang watched the conversation with quiet satisfaction. The gratitude he felt extended far beyond the memory of one winter evening many years earlier. In Maya he saw the living continuation of values that had shaped his own life, values that could not be purchased, inherited, or negotiated. Before departing, he walked over to Maya one final time. With a gentle smile, he offered another respectful bow, this time shorter but no less sincere. Maya returned the gesture immediately, her humility unchanged. "Your grandmother would be proud of the woman you have become," Chairman Kang said softly. Maya felt her eyes brighten with emotion, but she answered with the same calm grace that had guided her throughout the evening. "I hope I honor her every day, even in small ways." As Chairman Kang and Ethan made their way toward the grand entrance, many guests instinctively stepped aside, not because protocol demanded it, but because they had gained a new understanding of what genuine respect looked like. Maya quietly picked up the silver serving tray once again and continued helping the remaining staff prepare the ballroom for the end of the celebration. To anyone arriving at that moment, she would have appeared to be nothing more than a dedicated maid finishing another evening of work. Yet everyone who had witnessed what unfolded knew they had experienced something far more valuable than an extravagant banquet. They had seen how quickly appearances could mislead, how easily quiet character could be overlooked, and how a single act of sincere respect could transform an entire room. Long after the chandeliers dimmed and the final guests departed into the cool Chicago night, the story people carried home was not about wealth, influence, or power. It was about a humble young woman whose unwavering dignity reminded everyone present that the greatest measure of a person's worth has never been the title they hold, but the respect they choose to give others before asking for any in return.